Imagine discovering that the lucrative short-term rental market you thought was a gold mine is actually costing you money, just as governments across Europe flipped the switch on a massive digital surveillance net.
Yeah, it basically flips the script on everything we thought we knew about the sharing economy, and honestly, about private property rights.
Right, because while everyone was looking the other way, bureaucrats just quietly dropped this massive digital dragnet. Let's look at the biggest story hitting the travel industry this morning. Airbnb stock, ticker symbol ABMAB, just took an absolute
It
beating.
was a bloodbath, really.
It plunged 6.25% in a single trading session, dropped all the way down to $122.87. That sudden drop wiped out a massive chunk of their market value before lunch.
And, when you look at the triggers for a sell-off like that, it's this brutal combination of factors. We've got persistent inflation, rising energy costs hitting the airlines, and just generally slipping consumer confidence.
Yeah, people are just tightening their belts. Everyday families can't afford discretionary travel right now.
Exactly. But that economic squeeze, that's really only half the story here.
Right. The other half is this massive government crackdown rolling across Europe. And to add fuel to the fire, right as this bureaucratic overreach accelerates, Airbnb director Joseph Gebbia just sold off 58,000 shares of his own stock.
Wow.
Yeah. We were talking about a staggering $7.7 million insider sell-off.
Which, that naturally makes institutional investors very nervous when insiders dump stock during a brewing regulatory storm. The broader market definitely pays attention.
Absolutely. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're grabbing a thick stack of sources to figure out what is really going on behind the scenes. We pulled financial data from MarketBeat, legal rulings broken down by DDG Advocates, real estate math from the Home Select blog, spatial research from Elsevier, and the latest European tourism news.
It's a really diverse stack of data, but it all points to the exact same shift in the market.
Our mission today is simple. We are going to unpack exactly why Airbnb stock is dropping. We'll decode the new European laws that are quietly punishing private property owners.
Yeah.
And we're going to uncover the surprising mathematical truth about whether short-term rentals are actually still profitable for everyday people like you.
Right, and to understand the panic we're seeing on the streets of major tourist hubs, we first have to zoom out. We need to look at the massive data net the European Union is dropping on the entire continent.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly is the EU doing? Because up until now, it felt like cities were just playing a massive game of whack-a-mole with local property owners.
They absolutely were, and well, the EU decided to just end the game entirely. They passed EU Regulation 2024-1028.
Okay.
And the core takeaway from this legislation is that by May 20th, 2026, the traditional honor system for short-term rentals is permanently dead.
The honor system, meaning cities used to just set rules like limiting rentals to 90 days a year, but they had no real way to spy on hosts to see if they were actually following it.
Precisely. A city council would pass some strict zoning law, but unless a neighbor complained, they were flying blind.
Right.
But now, under this new regulation, platforms like Airbnb, Booking.com, and Vrbo, they must automatically share monthly activity data directly with local government authorities.
Wait, automatically? They're just handing over host identities and exact physical addresses to the government.
Yep, through a standardized digital portal.
How does that even work with Europe's notoriously strict privacy laws? That sounds like a massive government overreach to me.
Oh, it is incredibly invasive. But, the EU framed this specifically around municipal enforcement. They argue that local governments need this transparent data to manage housing crises.
So they just suspend your privacy rights.
Basically, yeah. So the platforms are now legally obligated to provide the host's identity, the exact address, official registration numbers, and the precise number of nights booked every single month.
So it's like the government finally gave themselves administrative access to everyone's personal business. They don't have to guess who is bending the rules anymore. The raw surveillance data is just piped directly to their dashboard.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. And if you want to know if these local bureaucrats will actually use this data to inflict pain on businesses, just look at Spain.
What did Spain do?
They started enforcing similar data sharing rules early as a test case. And they already slapped Airbnb with a massive $64 million fine.
$64 million.
Yeah, just for displaying listings that lacked proper local registration.
That is a massive hit to the balance sheet.
Right.
And a blatant cash grab by the government.
It really is a warning shot to the entire free market. And this is why this matters to you, the listener. This EU regulation isn't just a direct ban. It's the invisible enforcement plumbing.
Right. The plumbing.
For years, local governments passed strict laws they simply couldn't enforce. Now they have the data plumbing connected. They can sit at their desks and automatically penalize anyone crossing their red lines.
So if the EU laid down the plumbing, my next question is, who is turning the water pressure up the highest? Because looking through our tourism news stack, the city using this new data to aggressively target property owners is Paris.
Oh, Paris is absolutely ground zero for this regulatory war. They claim they're battling a severe housing crisis, and the local government is using every heavy-handed tool available to seize control of the market.
Right, and they always blame the everyday property owner for the housing crisis.
Always.
Yeah.
To give you a sense of their justification, there's a striking statistic in our sources. The Vaugirard School, right in central Paris, only had 51 students enrolled for the entire academic year.
Well, 51 kids.
Yeah. Entire middle-class families are fleeing the historic center because housing costs have shot up 25% since 2015.
I mean, that is incredibly sad to think about, a vibrant neighborhood devoid of children. But instead of fixing their own broken economic policies, the city government just targets the property owners.
Yeah. Exactly. They fought back with a harsh piece of legislation called the Loi Le Mer. Starting January 1st, 2025, Paris slashed the annual rental limit for primary residences.
Let me guess, they cut it drastically.
They did. It used to be 120 days. Now it's down to a strict 90 days.
And looking at these documents, if you break that 90-day rule, the government is not messing around. The financial penalties are just extortionate.
They really are.
If you get caught renting out a secondary residence without getting official commercial permission, which, by the way, is nearly impossible to get from these bureaucrats, you face a $50,000 fine.
Yep, 50 grand.
And even if you just fail to register your primary residence perfectly, they hit you with a $10,000 fine.
And the city inspectors are aggressively collecting. Paris has already raked in over $6.5 million in fines from private citizens just by scraping this platform data.
It's just a massive revenue generator for the city.
Exactly. But they didn't stop at time limits and cash grabs. They also introduced aggressive environmental compliance rules.
Ah, yes, the DPE energy rules. Let's explain what that actually means, because it sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare.
It is. France requires an energy performance diagnostic for all homes. Think of it like a government-mandated climate report card for your private property.
Okay, so they grade your house.
Right. From A to G, based on insulation, heating efficiency, carbon footprint, all that. Under the new rules, if your property gets a failing grade, an F or a G, it is completely banned from the short-term rental market.
So if you own a charming, drafty old apartment in Paris with single-pane windows, the government says you cannot put it on Airbnb.
Correct.
You either spend tens of thousands of euros of your own money renovating the insulation to meet their climate agenda, or you are locked out of the free market entirely.
The barrier to entry is just massive now. It completely crushes the casual middle-class
A single vote in the
property
U.S.
owner.
Senate
And
can
here's where it
freeze
gets
the
really
most
interesting
powerful
to me.
government on earth.
If Paris is
But
dropping
right
the
now,
hammer
so hard,
a political
handing out
standoff
50,000
threatens
fines
to blow up the
and
rules
raking in
forever.
6.5
Yeah, we
million,
are watching the
my immediate
fundamental
thought is,
machinery
why would
of
anyone
American
risk it?
lawmaking
Is the
just
payout really that good?
grind to
Or
an
are these
absolute
regulations
halt.
just
And honestly, the
bleeding
physical
property
toll
owners
on the
dry
people
while the
inside that
housing
building
market
is
stays
about to
broken
become
anyway?
very real. That is
Right,
the
so let's set
million-dollar
the scene.
question. And the
It's
answer
March
lies in the
2026.
actual math.
Picture the hallways
We
of
need
the
to
United
look at what
States
happens
Capitol
to the
right now.
money when a
Aides
city
are
goes to
literally
war with a
dragging
tech
military-style
Look,
cots
if you're
into
listening to
back
this, you've
offices.
probably run the
Oh,
mental
yeah.
math on buying an
Staffers are
investment
stockpiling
property.
energy drinks by the
You
case.
assume
Exactly.
charging
We are looking at a
$150
scenario
a
where
night
senators might
equals an
actively
absolute
refuse
gold
to
mine.
drink water
Sure,
just so
everyone
they don't
thinks
have to
that.
leave the floor
But
to
the
use
Home
the
Select
restroom.
blog
Which is
actually
wild,
did the
and it's
forensic
all because the
accounting on a
Senate is
standard Paris
completely
apartment.
deadlocked over the
And the
Save It
results
America Act.
completely
Right, that
destroyed
big
that
election
assumption
overhaul
for me.
bill.
Yeah. It
It's
shatters
centered
the
around measures
profitability
like
myth
voter
entirely.
ID
Let's walk through
requirements.
their 8th grade
Democrats
math
are
breakdown.
aggressively
They
blocking this
analyzed a
legislation,
standard
and
25 square
Republicans
meter
desperately
studio
want to pass
apartment
it.
in the 11th but they borough lacked the small. 60 votes
Okay,
required
so a small
to break the
studio
stalemate.
in a highly
Which means
desirable,
frustrations
trendy tourist
are just
area.
Exactly.
boiling
If
over.
you list that studio
Today,
on Airbnb
you have
for
28
the
Republican
absolute
senators,
maximum
people
allowed
like
90
Pete
nights
Ricketts
at
and
the
Cynthia
current
Lummis,
market rate, it grosses
demanding
about
that the Senate force a
8,550 euros for the
grueling,
year.
physical, talking filibuster.
€8,550.
They want
I
to
mean, that sounds
force
like a decent
Democrats
chunk
to
of change
stand on
for
the
just
floor and
3
talk
months of
until their
occupancy.
vocal cords
It
just
sounds
give out.
great
And
until
if
you
that fails,
calculate
they want
the
to
heavy
break the
operating
standing
costs.
rules of the
You
Senate
have to pay for
entirely
professional
to
cleaning
force a
between
final
every
vote.
single guest.
And the real
You
shocker
pay commercial
dropped
laundry
just a few
services
days
for
ago.
hotel
Senator
quality
John
sheets,
Cornyn, a man who
check-in
fiercely
fees,
defended the old Senate rules
15%
for his entire
platform cut,
career,
constant
just
minor
published
maintenance.
this
Once you
fiery
subtract
op-ed.
those specific
saying
costs,
Republicans
your
must
actual
act
net
now
revenue
to
falls
get
to
this bill passed.
Yeah, he said they have to deal a
€6,365.
fatal
So
blow
you're
to
only
the
left
rules,
with
which instantly triggered a massive public call-out from former
Now compare
Senator
that
Joe
to a
Manchin.
traditional
Manchin
year-long
slammed Cornyn
residential
online
lease.
for,
If
well,
you rent that
a
exact
massive
same
flip-flop.
studio
Because
to
the rules
a
of the
normal
Senate are
long-term
quite
tenant,
literally
reverse
hanging
is
by a
different.
thread
But
right
after
now.
deducting
the
decisions
standard
made in the
expenses
next
like
few
property
days will
tax
dictate
and
how
basic
American
fees,
laws are written for
Your
the
net
next
revenue
century.
approaches €8,200.
Welcome to this deep dive.
Yes.
Today, we have a custom mission
€8,200.
tailored
So the
just for
traditional
you.
boring long-term rental
We're going to explore
actually makes
the
a swashbuckling,
1,835
pirate-filled
more per
origins
year
of the
than the
filibuster.
short-term rental.
It
The
is a
math
crazy
doesn't lie.
history.
Traditional
really
rentals
is.
win by over 1,800
We'll also break down the
euros a year in
terrifying
this market.
parliamentary
And that higher
weapon
profit
known as
comes
the
with
nuclear
virtually
option.
zero daily
And finally,
stress.
we will
So you're telling me I
unpack
can
a
make €1,800
mind-bending
more a year,
mathematical
and the trade-off
concept
is I don't get
called
woken up
the
at 2
Manchin
a.m. by a
paradox.
panic tourist
Right,
who broke
which
my
proves
coffee
exactly
maker.
why
Sign me up.
politicians use
why would
gridlock as
anyone
a highly
still do the
calculated
short-term route
mathematical
if the math is
strategy.
worse?
So
and the government is
by the end of
breathing
this
down your neck.
conversation,
Well, some owners still
you will
do it
hold
because
the
they want to
secret
use the
decoder
apartment
ring
themselves
for the
occasionally.
chaos you see on
But
the
for
news.
pure investors
You will
looking for
understand
yield,
the hidden
this
game
proves
theory
that building a
that
financial
drives
plan
these
on
high-stakes
Airbnb
showdowns.
revenue is
Absolutely.
just a
Okay, let's
dangerous
unpack
game
this.
now.
Before
The
we can
overhead
truly
and the
grasp
red tape
the physical
simply eat
threats
the
and the
profits.
massive stakes
and that mathematical
of this
reality
2026
completely
SVB
shifts how
America
we look
Act
at the physical
standoff,
map of these cities.
we really
We
need
had
to
this
look at what the
major urban
filibuster
spatial
actually
study in our
is.
stack
And more importantly, how it
Elsevier,
started.
conducted by
because
a
it wasn't
researcher
designed
named
this way
Gian
by the
Luca
founders, right?
Right.
Like this
This
wasn't in
study
the
is
blueprint.
Not at all.
Fascinating.
If you read
He
the
looked at
U.S.
what physically
Constitution,
happened
you will
to the
not
layout
find the
of
word
Paris
filibuster
when
anywhere
these
in the
strict
text.
90-day rules
nowhere.
and massive
Nowhere.
fines kicked in.
The Constitution
what
basically
Bay
gives
calls
the Senate the
spatial
authority to
paradox.
set its own
Logically,
internal
you would
rules.
think
so
that
back in
strict
1789,
government
during the
limits and
very
the threat
first
of
session,
50,000
debates
fines
ended with just a
would
simple
push
majority
short-term
vote
rentals
out
Okay,
of the
so
highly
51
regulated
votes
city
and you're
center.
done.
Right.
Yeah, you'd
Exactly.
expect them to
But
disperse
there was
into the
this
quieter
massive
suburbs
loophole.
to avoid the
They
inspectors.
never
That's what happened
codified
in
a
Amsterdam
specific
and
procedure
Barcelona.
to force
But the
a
data
vote to
shows that did
happen
not
if
happen in
someone
Paris.
simply refused to stop
Bay's
talking.
study reveals that overall
So without a
short-term
mechanism
listings
to
in
cut
Paris
off
did
debate,
drop by 31%.
Politicians figured out they
The
could
government
just,
successfully
hold the
shrank
floor
the total
hostage.
market.
They did.
Okay, but who was
We
left?
actually have diaries
The
from
remaining
the very
professional
first session of
hosts the
Senate.
massive corporate
Pennsylvania
entities who manage
Senator William
multiple
McClay
properties.
wrote down his sheer
They actually
frustration
concentrated
that
their
senators
listings
from
in the
Virginia were
historic center.
intentionally
Wait,
talking away the
Professional
Just to make sure
multi-listings in the
specific
center of
bill
Paris
couldn't
actually
pass.
grew by
Right, they literally
2.68% despite
weaponized
the
the clock.
crackdown.
I mean, if they were holding the
Exactly.
legislative
How did that even
process
make sense?
hostage,
If
it
the
makes
center
perfect
of the
sense
city
why the
is where
press
the government
eventually started
enforcement
calling
is
them
the
pirates.
strictest,
Hmm.
why
Which
are
brings
the
us
big
to the actual
corporations
word
clustering there?
filibuster.
It comes down to
Yeah,
economies
it's
of
easily one of the
scale.
strangest words in
The
American
new
politics.
government
So where does
regulations
it
made
come
the
from?
market so legally
The etymology is
complex and heavy with
fascinating, honestly.
penalties
The term
that
really
only
took hold in the
massive corporate
1850s.
companies can survive.
It comes from the
I see.
Dutch word
They can afford to
freebeuter
retain legal
and
teams
the
to
Spanish
navigate the
word
bureaucratic
filibustero.
maze.
Which
They use
translates
expensive
directly to
software
freebooter
to
or
perfectly
pirate,
track the
Yes.
90-day limits across hundreds of
Specifically,
units.
So the everyday mom
mercenaries
and pop
pirates
host gets
who
terrified by
raided
the news
Caribbean
of a
islands and
10,000
Latin
euro
American
fine
countries
for a
during
simple
that
paperwork
era.
error.
So they were
pull
calling
their
these
listing.
distinguished
they tap
senators
out.
pirates.
But the massive corporate
Pretty
host
much.
just
The term entered the political
views this
lexicon
complex
because
government
observers
compliance
recognized the
as a
behavior.
barrier to entry.
Senators
It
who
literally
talked
keeps
for
their amateur
hours
competition
were
out of the
literally
market.
hijacking
Precisely.
the Senate
The
floor.
strict
Like
government
taking the
rules
government hostage,
accidentally
just like a
engineered
pirate
market
taking
where
over a
only the
ship.
most
Exactly.
hardcore corporate
So let's
investors
track how the
stayed.
Senate tried to
And
fight
now they
off these
completely
legislative
dominate
pirates.
the most lucrative
Because as the
historic
country grew,
neighborhoods.
it's
I mean, you
classic
couldn't just have one
government
person shut
overreach.
down the entire
They try to
government for
regulate
weeks
the
on
market,
end.
No,
and
you
they end
couldn't.
up just
But it took a
crushing the
long
middle
time to
class
build a
and handing
defense.
monopoly
By
to
the
the
early
corporations.
20th
It happens every
century, these
time.
So let's take
marathon
stock of
speeches
where we
became
are. We have a
catastrophic
falling
for a
stock price,
modernizing
an
nation.
insider
I can
dumping
imagine.
shares,
So finally, in
massive EU data
1917,
surveillance
President
exposing
Woodrow
every
Wilson
host,
pushed the Senate
Paris
to adopt
handing out
Rule
extortionate
22.
fines,
This
math
rule
proving
created a
traditional
formal
rentals are
process
better,
called cloture,
and
Cloture,
everyday
okay.
owners fleeing
which
the
is
market.
simply a
Right.
mechanism to
It sounds
force
like
an end to
Airbnb's
debate.
entire
But
business model
here's
is
the
completely
catch.
doomed.
It required
definitely
a
paints a
massive
bleak picture
two-thirds
for the
majority majority
everyday
vote to
host.
trigger.
2/3.
But the
wow.
story
Which is an
takes a sharp
incredibly steep
turn
hill
when
to
we actually
climb.
look at
So
how
stiff
free market
that over the
capitalism
next
fights
4
back.
decades,
Yes.
the Senate
Let's
only
talk about
managed to
Airbnb's legal
successfully
armor
invoke
and their
cloture
technological
5 times.
pivot. Because
That is
despite all these
wild.
fines,
Yeah.
Airbnb
Southern senators
recently won a
famously
massive
used this
legal
exact
victory in
tool
France.
to block civil rights
We have a
legislation
legal
for
brief
years.
from
The
DDG
gridlock grew
Advocates
so intense
detailing a
that in
ruling by the Paris
1975,
Judicial
the
Court.
Senate lowered
And
that
this
threshold
ruling
from
is a
2/3
vital
down to
shield
60
for the
out of the
platform.
100
A property
total
landlord
senators.
tried to sue Airbnb
Okay.
directly,
And that
claiming the
60-vote
platform should be
threshold is
held
the number that
civilly
dominates our
liable because
politics
a
today.
tenant
Exactly.
illegally
But
sublet their
here's where I
apartment
think
on
a
the
lot of
site.
people get
Okay.
confused.
The landlord
When we hear
argued
the
that
word
Airbnb
filibuster,
acts as an
we don't
editor
just think of a
content,
60-vote
and therefore
math
they should be
problem. We
actively
picture
monitoring
Jimmy
and
Stewart
policing
in Mr.
all
Smith
listings
Goes to
to ensure
Washington.
they comply
Right, a
with
classic
local
movie
laws.
scene.
Which,
Yeah.
I mean,
We
if they
picture
were
a
a
newspaper,
single
that
person
makes sense.
standing at a
Yeah, but the
podium,
court
reading the
firmly
phone
disagreed
book,
with that logic.
sweating,
What's
refusing
wrong
to
with
sit
it?
down.
The court ruled
But
that under
senators rarely
French
do
and
that
EU
anymore.
law,
Why don't they have
Airbnb
to
is
physically
strictly
talk to them?
classified
That
as
is a crucial
technical
piece of the
hosting
puzzle.
provider.
So
They're
in the
definitively
1970s,
not
the
an
Senate
editor.
created
they're
something
basically
called
like the phone
two-track
company.
system.
Exactly.
The phone company isn't legally liable
Well,
if
before
two
the
people
system,
plot a
a
crime over a
filibuster
phone call.
stopped all Senate business.
And the court is saying
completely.
Airbnb isn't
Nothing else
liable
could
if a
happen.
host breaks a
The
zoning
Senate
law.
realized they had
That
a
is
whole country
exactly
to
the
run, so they
distinction.
changed
Because
the
Airbnb
procedure.
is just the digital phone
Under the new
company
system, if a
connecting
senator
host
simply
and a
threatened
guest,
to filibuster
they
a
have
bill,
no legal
the
obligation
Senate leadership
to
would just set that
proactively
controversial
do the
bill
government's job
aside
of
on a different
policing
track and
zoning
move on
laws.
to other
So the platform
business.
itself stays protected
So they made
behind
it
this
painless.
free market shield.
You didn't have to stand
while
up
the
and destroy
individual
your
host
vocal cords
takes all the
anymore. You
risk.
just
Yep.
sent an email
And that
saying,
robust
"I
legal armor
object,"
is a
and the
major
bill was
reason why
frozen.
Wall Street isn't
Like a silent
completely
filibuster.
panicking. You capture the
looking at the
dynamic
financial
perfectly.
notes from
The
Market Beat.
physical endurance
Despite the stock
requirement
dropping,
basically vanished.
The financial firm
But the fiscal
Truist
records from
actually
before
upgraded
and outside
Airbnb
that
to a
silent
hold
system,
rating, and they set a
those
future
remain
target
pretty
price
legendary.
Oh, absolutely.
$129.
Strom Thurmond spoke against the
If the
Civil
government
Rights
is
Act
attacking
in
their core
1957 for
Why is
24
Wall Street
hours and
projecting
18
Imagine
months.
finding out your
Truist
24
cited a
hours
very strong
is the
secret
modern
phone
individual
company
record
companies,
belongs to the
primarily
corporate
driven by
entity.
Airbnb's
It is
aggressive
a
adoption.
pretty
In
shocking
April
realization when you
2025,
actually look at the
Booker
math.
spoke
Right.
European
Well,
bureaucrats
imagine for a
25
second
hour
that you
windows
have a
and
savings
fines
account.
against the policies
Airbnb
of the
is
Donald
spending
Trump
billions
administration, pivoting
I mean,
their
just
core
think
to
about
family.
how
How
does
does
AI
AI
actually help a property
This
manager
money
beat
was
these
regulations
regulations?
for fixing a leak.
It allows
You
them to
lean
scale
on your
without
desk.
You
hiring
can't
staff.
even
leave the
If we
chamber
don't
AI
fix
now
this
has
roof,
complex
it is a
pricing.
house
It
of brutal,
automates guest
It's an
dangerous
existential
tests.
crisis, and it
for the
predicts
house.
exactly
Exactly.
when a
It's to save the
property
house
will
fund.
hit
It
its
really
government
reminds you of
mandated
a
You know, your
passenger
car
on a
breaks
speed
down.
train
Yeah,
who
so the
decides
corporate
it's
manager
just
can
you've got bills
seamlessly
piling on
pivot the
emergency. So what do you
listing
do?
to another
Everyone else into
platform
the
or a
walls
different
just because
lease
they
cut
don't
money
like
or
the
they have
final
your credit
destination.
cards
And
until
the
you're
It is a
finally
professional hosts
highly
on the ground
disruptive
are
maneuver.
evolving
Wait,
right
that
along
raises
this
this
scenario.
question.
They aren't just sitting
The roof
around
is
waiting for
rule
the
is
city
or at least
universally
universally
disrupted. They are
disruptive.
actively
And the
finding
cars,
the
the majority
massive
party
self-inflicted
absolutely
their
hates
private
it.
property
$1.5
generating $5 billion.
Exactly.
Why
Capital
haven't states
just
voted
always
to
finds a way.
destroy it
Completely
permanently?
avoiding
That
the biggest
is the
core
core
tension
Welcome to the
in
deep dive.
United
Something
States
called the
Senate.
Today
Right
we're
there.
exploring
The
a
reason the
crackdown
filibuster
houses most
survives
sleight
is
of
that
hand
permanently
coming out of
destroying
the
it requires a
because it
maneuver
sounds like
so
you're brilliant at
extreme
strategic
and so
energy
disruptive
investment
to the
funds.
institution
Mobilite
that
is
it
a
earned a
completely
terrifying
legal
It's a
nickname,
huge
the
pot of
Union
money
Army.
meant to save
Exactly.
the
And
environment.
nuclear options
It sounds
turning
like a
into
Cold
a
War
huge
thriller.
And
Let's
because
walk
it is
through the
legally
actual floor
classified
mechanics.
as
Paying
a
an
standard
electric bill. How does
residential
a
use
parliament
and not a
actually
tourist
It really
rental.
is.
launch
It's
this
become a
weapon?
center of
Okay, let's break
bypasses
down the
the
parliamentary
parliamentary
cheat.
all
You've
those
got a
strict
Democratic
normally
governor,
changing the
frustrated
standing
environment,
I see.
written rules
So
of
you
the
don't
Senate
need to
require
beg the city for a
overwhelming and
complex
conservative
permit.
critics
You
who
don't
are
face
rightly
wasting
calling
on
this
highly
whole thing a
polarized
shell
modern
game.
And most
politics.
importantly,
Securing
when you look at the
67
documents
voting
we
to
have
change
today,
a rule
income,
reports
while
basically
keeping away
mathematically
proposals,
impossible.
critiques,
Exactly.
heavily regulated
So they
long
found a
term.
backdoor.
It is really hard
A
to
backdoor.
Professional
Yeah,
mission for this
backdoor
deep
that
dive
is
bypasses
simple.
the
Follow the
67
money.
vote requirement in
Always
Crackdown
follow the
laws.
money.
We are
Okay,
going
so
to
let's
see
bring this
step-by-step
massive
funds
puzzle
designed to
together.
fight
We
climate
started with
change
an
is being
Airbnb
used
stock.
to plug
First, the
holes in
Senate
the
Majority
budget.
Leader stands
And
up
we'll dig into the
and
argument
reads
that
the reign of
hasn't found money
order.
at
They
all.
basically
This
tell the
essentially
presiding
a
officer
backdoor
that
the root
the
cause
written
of the
rule
market
Let's get
anxiety
right
and
into it.
entirely
The
digital
Strategic Energy
surveillance
Investment
net
Fund.
kills
So the
the
majority
honor
leader
system and
basically
spies on
stands up
property
and
owners.
claims
Is it
the
actually
sky
zoomed
is
in on
the
a
limit.
pair?
Essentially,
Where
on
slash
paper.
limits
Then the
to
presiding
90 days.
officer looks
Started
through the
handing
rule
out
book and says,
50,000
no,
SIF
your
is
point of
managed
order
by
is
the
basically
Maryland
weaponizing
Energy
The
climate
text
mandates
says what
and
its whole
zoning
stated
laws,
purpose
which is the only
to
logical
reduce
response.
energy bills.
Right, and we
But
ran the
here
math
is
to
to
show
show
that
that
fund
traditional
majority leader
removals net
immediately
about
appeals to the
solar
New
panels
York
and
Law
efficiency
per
of
year
under
than
standard
Airbnb
Senate
anyway.
procedure.
But here
Proving
is
that
the
the heavy
deciding
government
an appeal
regulations
only
just created a
requires a
spatial
simple
paradox.
Where
majority
does the
of
money
51
They
actually
crushed the
go?
casual
So,
middle
the majority
class
party
host,
they aren't
but left
voting unison to
sophisticated
override
corporate
the chair.
professionals.
And the
No, that's
moment
why
they
we
get
dominate
51
the
votes,
historic city
they
center.
establish a
Finally,
finally, we looked
40%
at how
comes
the
from
free market
regional carbon
completely
auctions.
overwrites
Airbnb
the
But The
is
big
shielded
chunk,
by
the
court
one
rulings
growing like
protecting
crazy,
them
that
as a
comes from
political
something called
host.
alternative.
They're
rewrite
using
the rules
aggressive
using
AI
a simple
innovations
majority,
to lower
which is
costs.
just a
ignoring
fancy
the
government
And
67
savvy
vote
investors are
requirement.
using
It's a
midterm
fire failure.
mobility.
It's
Let me
like
break it illegally
sitting
buy
down
their
to play a
house.
board game
Government
and
utility
right in the
companies
middle of a
buy
tight
a
map.
certain
It's an
amount
incredible
of
story
resources.
of free market
They have to
resilience
further use
against
renewables.
government
Just because you
overreach.
happen to have one
And
extra
for you
layer of
listening,
this.
That's a
it
great
is
way
a
to put
stark
it.
reminder
But that
that
guarantees
being really well
retaliation.
informed,
State
the
gives
moment
them
the
an
other
escape
team
to
gets
get
past the
scary
scary
utility
headline,
can
they're
just
going
pay
to
a fee
rewrite. Take the
directly
time
to
to
the
see the
state
actual
instead.
map
If we
and
connect this to the
recognize the
bigger
invisible
picture,
bureaucratic
we can see how
regulations
this weapon
that are
has
truly
utilities
moving the
aren't
markets.
escalated.
I want to
over
leave you
just
with a
paying
final
fine.
puzzle.
Every time a party
Let's hear
pushes
it.
that nuke,
With
if heavy-handed cities like Paris eventually succeed,
and the
their
retaliation
new
just becomes more
surveillance plumbing and
incredibly
massive
escalation
fines
for us. When did they start
actually
pushing
crush
buttons?
the short-term rental market
green
back down
energy
to
mandates
nothing.
are
What
failing.
happens to all that massive
It is a
corporate investment
completely
capital?
Good
Previously
question.
called
It doesn't just
Hulk.
disappear.
The government
The Hulk
exactly.
So
Does
aggressive,
that corporate
and
money
money
so
so
distorted because it implies
buying
more
multi
traditional
right
structured
structured
housing
housing
instead
the
of
first
causing
major
the
launch
exact
stats
same
on
housing
this are
crisis for
staggering.
local
Democrats
residents.
they are
led by Harry
in
Reid,
2022.
frustrated.
So
This
that
revenue
lucrative
was
gold mine you thought you
$77
understood.
million. So they
It
used
turns
that
out it's
nuclear
fully
option to
wired
drop
with
the
a government
threshold from
surveillance net.
51
The
votes for lower
bureaucratic
court
math is
judges
working
and
against
executive
you,
branch
and the
nominees.
real profits
they
belong to the
explicitly left an
corporate
exception
pros
for this
who
Right.
know
Now
how to
the state
outsmart the
did.
regulators.
But 4 years
Thanks for
later,
diving
in
deep with us.
2017,